Hello, everybody. Thank you for um, supporting the Black Disability Justice Mbongi with Indigenous Mental Health. My name is Elmina Bell. I am one of the visionary seeders at Indigenous Mental Health, which is a Black-led pan-Indigenous organization devoted to uplifting Indigenous mental health approaches, and uplifting lived experiences with various mental health conditions. I am a dark-skinned, thin Black person wearing a knitted head wrap, um, earrings with wooded beads, and a African print top that has uh, blue and black circles outlined with white, and also has some white swirls on it. So, and I'm also wearing red lipstick. And my pronouns are she and they. So I'm gonna share the screen so that people can see what's going on. Okay. So this is just a little bit background about us and our inspirations, and wanting to acknowledge and uplift the Indigenous healers, the community healers who do the work of helping folks through mental health when Western mental health has failed them for various reasons. There could be why that happens, right? There's racism, there is lack of acknowledgement of the whole person, there's ableism, feeling that people with lived experiences and disabilities, uh, what they have to say is not valid. And it's just so important to uplift this work. So for this event, we wanted to talk about what disability justice means, to Black people, and have us share our experiences about what that means for us. And for me, it means, decolonization. It means, which is disrupting, dismantling, and unlearning Western mental health approaches and dismantling the institutions from that promote racist and ableist approaches. This also requires sacred warriorhood. Decolonization is going to be war in some kind of way, whether it's intellectual warfare, which is something I experienced early on and when I was in academia before I dropped out of grad school, or whether it is medical warfare that happens in medical institutions or in therapy. There's just, if you confront these injustices and these colonial mentalities and mindsets, or try to dismantle them, and you're going to be met with, attacks. So that is something to keep in mind. I personally, um, as a Black disabled person who um, the Western world has called bipolar 2 and has been called ADHD, right? From that Western perspective, has labeled me that, right? I can accept for myself that I'm disabled, meaning that there are certain times that I'm not able to do certain things that maybe other people can do, right? But I have difficulty claiming disorder or saying that my bipolar is a disorder, because I don't want to have to rely on what Western white supremacist diagnostic and assessment tools define as order, or defining order for me, because to them, Blackness is inherently disordered. It is inherently wrong or too much. And this is why we see Black people in medical institutions, whether it's physical or uh, mental health, be misdiagnosed a lot of the times, be labeled as difficult to work with when they're advocating for themselves, and all these kinds of things, because Blackness in and of itself is not what they see as order. They see whiteness as order, right? Um, and I wanted to take some time to talk more about that, because in the live version of this, which I'm re-recording now, my portion, because of the tech issues that happened, The people who were live saw me and everything was clear, but in the recording, there were some issues. So I'm here recording this. But one of the things that I did want to add on to that was about this portion about identifying as disordered or identifying as that, because I know it's a very nuanced topic, and sometimes Black people who are disabled may feel disordered, and if they do want to share that, they should be able to identify that. But I also wanted to add context as to why some Black people may not want to do that, and it's up to each individual Black person to define themselves, right? I also practice disability justice as a mostly marginalized Black person through re-indigenizing, which is embracing holistic Indigenous uh, forms that have that acknowledge that not everyone's mind is the same, right? That's just something that Indigenous peoples understood. And honoring the uniqueness of each person, their body, their spirit, their path, and rejecting spirit science binaries. That's a very Western thing. Oh, spirit is separated from science. Indigenous peoples don't do that. Um, and I also wanted to share more on thoughts on resources on Black African indigeneity from our previous events that people may want to explore in an article that I also wrote about it. It's linked here that people can check later, because oftentimes people don't understand that Africanness is indigenous too because of anti-Blackness that seeks to erase that. And it's important to embrace this. I also embrace a more like a neutral rather than uh good versus bad binary um of my conditions, right? Like sometimes there are certain things about the conditions that can be good, sometimes there's things that can be bad, sometimes there's things that's just neutral, and what's good or bad or uncomfortable for somebody can be comfortable for someone else. And so a lot of things are dependent on a person's relationship to a certain experience or and condition. I just wanted to make sure that everything was okay here and that the sound was okay. We can go back to the presentation now. Okay. So, so tips for releasing and transmuting shame around being disabled. I think it's important to remember disabled ancestors. Um, Reflecting through identity, sharing in nature also helps me honoring cycles and fluidity of my body when I go through ups and downs with the different conditions that I have, and noticing that nature also does that helps. Embracing that my sensitivity and the things that I feel, because bipolar is a condition that is really about feelings and emotions, right? That I feel help me notice societal issues that society sometimes pushes others to suppress or wants others to suppress. It kind of helps me fight that suppression that wants you to not feel anything when oppression is happening, so it can be maintained. Acknowledging systemic barriers that make disabilities more challenging to live with is not my fault. Like acknowledging that those things are not my fault. Having patience with the limitations arise, leaning into more fluid sense of times that my ancestors had that allows room for disability to be more accommodated through having more time to do things. Listening to other people, disabled folks' stories, and knowing that I'm not alone in what I'm going through. That's storytelling and learning through storytelling. That's also a strong Indigenous um, African modality and Indigenous peoples in general, right? So, another thing that I wanted to draw attention to in terms of framing and why it's so important to look at where words come from and who's determined as sane or who's determined as orderly or healthy, right? I just wanted to add these two quotes to add more context to that. One of them is from ancestor Dr. Kobe Cambone, who was a distinguished past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, who divested from the American Psychological Association, or APA, in 1968. He said, in a Western world, African identity can be seen as a burden. There are degrees to disorder which you are labeled depending on the degree to which you stand committed and dedicated to challenging white supremacist domination. There is a reversal of reality whereby the sane under white supremacy domination become the insane. So, people who are sane, who are being honest and witnessing their oppression and speaking up about it and not trying to suppress it, will be, or who are having a healthy reaction, I don't want to use the word sane, but having a healthy reaction to things that are going on, are going to be viewed as insane or disordered, right? And then there's a proverb here, from the translated by the author of the book Mbongi, Political African Institution, which is something that this event is actually inspired by, right? He says that his people say that the community without the institution of Bongi, when it used to have one, dies. The community without Bongi belongs to madmen. So this is like, for our ancestors not having Bongi, which is community, which is places where the community comes together to support one another and hear each other's needs and be responsible for one another. Um, that when you don't have that, that is insanity, or that is disorder, right? So our understanding of disorder and health is always going to be different from oppressive systems because of these things. So, another inspiration behind this event was a lot of the discourse that's been happening over the past couple of years around boundaries, which is a word that I used to use in the more intentional way that it was, I guess, brought up to be used. But I've noticed has now been overused, and it's not, the overuse and the misuse has now I've noticed, become a deterrent towards community care and some of the things that Bongi even stands for, right? So, I've noticed that as decolonization work increases, I think we need to be expanding our capacities for divestment, for community care, and portals of connection, not creating more boundaries. We cannot like boundary our way through decolonization or boundary our way through re-indigenization. And boundaries are important, right? But balance is also important. Balance is really important in indigenous systems. And so when something has been overdone or overused, it is very important to interrogate why and see what can be done to repair or repurpose it. And I've noticed in the past couple of years, boundary shifting from a self-care tool to being a constant talking point, and even something used to be a conflict avoidant towards harm and abuse. Colonization works to limit us, and I think decolonization and re-indigenization work requires us to expand.